Hi there, everyone. So we're going to go through navigating the Red Forest, which is helping you understand how you can secure a forest with Microsoft's ESAE. So who am I? So I'm Derek Price. I'm a security consultant at NCC Group. I've been there for 7 years. Started off as a junior and worked my way up, starting off with getting things like CRT, eventually getting CCT, being a check team leader. So very interested in infrastructure. Which is where a lot of this sort of comes from. A lot of people, a lot of tests involves testing Active Directory, so it became quite an interesting thing for me to sort of like look at and investigate. So the agenda is to go through, what is Microsoft's Red Forest or ESEA. We've got design, and we've got how to build, all the gotchas that we've found along the way, how to use privileged access workstations and their design and deployment, and also a little bit of security 101. So the main reason that the ESA exists is actually due to a lot of issues that people have when they're on a pen test. So anybody, put your hands up if you're a pen tester in the room. Okay, quite a lot of you. So how many people have got DA off an internal job very quickly? Well, a lot of, but a lot of the time, you end up with DA credentials, and you look how many domain administrators there are, and there's an absolute there's so many, and a lot of the times there's no simple fixes for them, and a lot of the time you spend talking to the client about how they can secure it, but they can't change their forest, and you end up talking to people and they're having these sorts of questions, and people that don't understand that directory, or they've put groups within groups, or the Active Directory looks like a complete mess, and people have left, and people have made changes to the directory so that it can't be changed in the future. The people got reversible encryption and all sorts of crazy things turned on. So Microsoft came up with the ESEA, which is what this looks like. So what you actually have is you have your normal forest, which stays as it is, but you actually build another separate forest, which becomes your administrative forest, or the ESEA. What this allows you to do is to keep your forest exactly as it is, and Microsoft have actually used this in their own infrastructure. So Microsoft are quite good at sort of doing what they say and what they do and what they recommend. So they have actually built this, and it allows you to keep your forest as it is and just have this separate one next to it. There's a bit of a better diagram here. So you actually build your forest completely separate, and you have what we constitute as tiers. Now, with tiers, what you end up with is a tiered system that works like this. So you split all your infrastructure up into tiers. So in the tier 0, you have your domain controllers, and you also have your Exchange servers in your tier 0. And then your tier 1 is normally the rest of your servers. And then you have your tier 2, which is normally your workstations. Now, what you actually are doing here is actually splitting up all the infrastructure, and you're actually having different sets of credentials for each one. So your tier 0 is maintained by a set of credentials. You have your tier 1 with a set of credentials, and you have a tier 2. And none of the tiers can talk to each other. So your tier 0 account can't log into a tier 1, and your tier 1 can't log into a tier 0. So you can't go up and down. It's all keeping it all separate, which allows you to have a set of credentials for each one on the separate forest. Now, when you're coming to the stage where you want to design and you want to build this infrastructure, you need to have some... Oh, the screen's gone off. Oh, come back. Gone off. Just relax on it. Yeah, try it. So we've lost it. What are the talks to get technical differences on mine? Oh, wait. Sorry about that. Okay, so when you're building this, you have to put in some design considerations. So you're going to build this on all new infrastructure. You don't want any of this infrastructure to be old legacy kit. So you want to build this on new hardware. It needs to be in a secure location. The recommendation from Microsoft is to use Hyper-V and have Hyper-V cluster. You need to have separate storage because you want to keep everything away from your old domain to make sure nothing's ever attacked, and we'll go into a bit more detail shortly. You're not going to domain join this new infrastructure to your old domain. You're going to create a new forest. You're going to have it's going to be heavily segregated. You don't want somebody to come in and attack your new shiny new administrative forest. So it's going to be heavily segregated. It's also going to be heavily hardened. So a lot of people will have issues with hardening because it'll stop people doing their day-to-day job, or it'll make things take longer. But on the Red Forest implementation, you want it to be as secure as possible. You also need to have the latest operating system. So you need 2019, and it also needs to be at the 2016 functionality level. And 2016 is a must-have due to the way all the infrastructure and all the trusts that you put in are all in 2016 and 2016 only. And one of the biggest design considerations is that it has to be a one-way trust. I've actually seen clients try to implement the Red Forest and they've put in a two-way trust, which means that the legacy old domain that's all hackable and very easy to get into allows you straight into the Red Forest. So you must make sure it's always it's always a one-way trust. Now, one of the biggest things that you could do, but you need to be aware of this as well, is you don't want to be putting a Red Forest into infrastructure that is already has lots of issues, because you're still going to get compromised. So you want to be able to fix sort of the low-hanging fruit to start with. So the things we recommend to clients is that they remove the legacy stuff like open shares. They must deploy laps, Kerberos. You must change all your Kerberos tickets to your accounts to longer passwords. They can't be cracked. Get rid of NetBIOS over TCP and LLM&R. Get your patching up to date. But once you've sort of got a client in this position, you can then help them sort of deploy the Red Forest. The way to build this is to use Hyper-V 2019. It's got some nice new features in it. One of the best parts of this is it has a proper 2-node cluster. So it's very simple to build and very cheap to build. So you can actually probably build a Red Forest and get all the infrastructure in place for around about 10 to 15 grand. Because you only need 2 servers now. You can also employ lots of features. There's things like shielded VMs, so that they're encrypted on disk, to help prevent rogue administrators and get access to virtual disks or taken into another environment. You're also going to need things like separate storage plugged into there. We're going to build everything on a guarded fabric to give extra security. So once you've got all this infrastructure in place, you can then start building. And the only things you actually require to do a Red Forest is to start with a domain controller and a WSUS server in there. So that's it. You've only got these 2 bits of infrastructure, so you don't need anything too crazy. You can go into the just-in-time administration section if you want to, but a lot of people just tend to implement the basics with a domain controller and a WSUS server. If you didn't want to do the just-in-time stuff, the only stuff you've got to add is an SQL server, a SharePoint server, and a PAM server with all the management stuff, components installed. So not too much more. So how does the Red Forest actually work? So you have this sort of concept on the screen. So it allows your admin forest to be on one side and your production forest to be on the other. And you have, basically the privileges are mapped. So you have your account in your admin forest, and this maps over using the shadow principles. So you have your tier 0 account, and you can map that over to a domain administrator or a different type of a tiered account on the other side that has admin in certain parts. So you have your tier 0 user, your tier 1 user, and your tier 2 user. And these are all mapped over. You can sort of see, I don't know how big that picture is. Oh, that actually does look quite good. So you can see here, you have your sol admin, and you have your, so you've got the shadow principles here, and we've got all the admins here, and they're all mapped over to these objects here. So these have all been mapped over and go over. You can sort of see it a bit better in here. So the sol admin here has had its privileges mapped over to the production forest. So you can see here that they've actually got in the production forest the sol admin, but if you log on, do the who am I /all, you can see that the domain admins is all tagged there with the 512, 519, and everything that's in this sort of diagram here. So you can see the SIDs at the end there have been mapped over, which is using the shadow principles, and allows the ability for you to now have full control over your production forest from your administrative forest. So now you've built this new production, this new administrative forest. You know how the issue is it's just sort of sat away, all secure and hardened, but you're still using your laptop to access it. So Microsoft came up with privileged access workstations. We're going to go through what is a POR and why do you need one. We're going to go through why you should use a dedicated workstation, why an administrative VM is bad, and the use of credential guard and hardening. So you've got your nice forest all built, and it's all hardened and all really good, and this is the sort of extra thing you can do. So the current threat environment for most of our organizations is an attacker gets on a user's workstation, the privilege escalates, and they get onto the assets. So what we recommend is that you have a workstation that's in a position of, you want to have a separate workstation connected to your new Red Forest network, which is secure. And you do that using this privileged access workstation. So that's how a normal attack would happen. So what you can do here is you have an administrative VM, which is what a lot of people do. Now, in administrative VM, if I was to compromise your user VM, your user host, was to compromise your user host, that would give me direct access to everything on your system. So if your administrative VM lives on there, I can get straight into your administrative VM, pull out the credentials, and go and attack a system. What we actually recommend you do is you have a user VM. So your host, your main host that you're booting up is actually the administrative system, and it has a VM on top, which is your user VM, which is how we go on to the simultaneous use. So you've got your administrative host and your user VM. If somebody is to compromise your user VM, they get your low-level credentials. They can't go anywhere else. They're sort of stuck unless they've got a lovely 0-day in Hyper-V, which you've got bigger problems if somebody's going after you and they've got a 0-day for Hyper-V. So with the administrative host, you end up in a situation where that underlying host is completely firewalled off and everything, and you have everything sort of there, but you have this user VM, and it means that if that gets compromised, you won't have, they can't break out anywhere. They'll get some user creds and that's all. Now, once you have that up and running, you can then need to get a lot of hardening done on the underlying host. You want this administrative host to be as hardened as possible and have little ability to get anywhere. So you can use things like Credential Guard. So you'll want to use Credential Guard to protect credentials that are stored in memory. You can do that using the hypervisor's built-in capabilities. You can also, we also need to go down the lines of hardening. So the biggest thing is all about getting your hardening really good. You don't want somebody to be able to get onto your administrative host and compromise anything going that way. So a lot of the things you have to do is lots of hardening, lots of baselining. Microsoft actually have a list of hardening guides for privileged access workstations with all the GPOs in them. And you can also obviously employ AppLocker so that the only things you should be able to really run is remote desktop and any PowerShell scripts that you need to get your privileges. Lots of GPOs, make sure the laps get listed. One of the things that, one of the admins that who I've seen build this, they actually went through and did all the lol bins attacks, and they manually went through and created GPOs and app blockers to stop that from happening. So once you've got this, you're now in a situation where you have your privileged access workstation, you now have your production, you have your production network, which has been left alone, and you now have your Red Forest. What you then have to do is you want them to be in a position where there's no administrators left in your production forest. So you can start pulling people out. You give everybody their privileged access workstation and a new set of credentials in the Red Forest, and it should get to a point where the only accounts that are left in your administrators group in your production LAN are the default administrators group, which you can stick in a safe for emergency break glass, and probably your Exchange accounts, which will go into why the Exchange will need to stay. So you've now got if your attackers on your network start doing all their usual attacks, a responder, and they start getting to the point where they've got some credentials and log onto a box and they do, I'm going to go after a domain administrator. There's actually no domain administrators left, or if there is, there's not going to be any credentials flying around for them. And they'd have to, one of the big things about the Red Forest as well is that it has the ability to do the time to live on your credentials is really small. So when you activate your account, you can say it's valid for 4 hours, and after 4 hours, that's it, it's gone. And that allows people to very granularly get their access, complete the task, and then all of their credentials are expunged from the system. So when an attacker gets on, they're going to find it very hard to move around. And also, as the tiers can, if anybody was to compromise anything, the tiers are sort of locked down in a way that if you were to get on a tier like a workstation and you did get a set of creds that lasted maybe 20 minutes, you'd only be able to get onto your workstations. You wouldn't be able to go any higher, whereas a lot of the time when you're an attacker, you can normally just bounce straight up to main admin. So one of the things that a client will normally ask is, what sort of gotchas are there for the Red Forest? So the way Exchange works is it has something called universal groups that get created when the system gets built. With Exchange's universal groups, they don't shadow well. I know some admins that I've seen do it have tried, but it doesn't shadow well at all. Enterprise admins doesn't shadow well either. So a lot of the time they can normally promote themselves on the production forest to do the enterprise admin task and then put it back in the safe and change password. The WSUS server needs to be standalone on your Red Forest. So we recommend you keep that separate and don't start poking firewall holes into your Red Forest area. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you're starting to put holes in something that's quite secure. So the lol bins is hard and manual. There's so many lol bins sort of things to go through and harden that it can be quite time consuming. We also need to make sure you put people into the protected user group. So the people on the production on the Red Forest, get put into protected user groups so they don't leave credentials lying around. Also, one of the biggest things, which I think a few admins have come across with, is that the shadow principles that you're using to move your credentials so that they work, or you're shadowing over users, it requires a functionality level of 2012 on your production forest. We had a few issues where a user or an admin decided to put all of this into his infrastructure, but one of his domain controllers was 2008, which meant his functionality level was 2008, and it got really weird and wouldn't log into certain systems. One of the big things as well that's coming through is Azure. Azure it's quite hard to get into your Red Forest, but Microsoft are coming up with a better way to do that soon. And that is actually the end of my talk. So, has anybody got any questions? Yeah.
How many attacks you see when prevented with a proper configured Red Forest?
So there's not a lot of people have done it yet, which is sort of the reason for the talk, and not a lot of people have actually implemented it yet. I've only seen one actual working example, and it was a learning curve. There was definitely some issues, like the protected user groups wasn't put on, so they were leaving credentials lying around on servers. And a lot of people have to build it and make it slightly insecure to get stuff moved over to start with and teething problems with firewalls. But I've seen some very good implementations of it. Yeah.
So, good technical solution potentially, but there's existing Forest already without it. You've already mentioned some of the issues with shadowing. What the main block is, because it's not really a technical issue, it's more the human issue.
So the good thing about the Red Forest is that you're building something completely new to the side. So you don't actually have to disturb your forest at all to start with. So you can build it, get all the laptops up and running. So you can basically have everybody doing it, but they can still admin with their old sets of credentials. And then what you slowly do is you have to unpick all the tech debt that you've got in your production forest. So you do NetGroup administrators and you see there's 45 domain admins. That's going to take a lot of unpicking. We normally see where, there's service accounts in there. Somebody created the service account in 2013 and nobody knows what the password is for it. and it's also running like Exchange, and it's running all sorts of stuff. So it's a time-consuming process to unpick. But what you should end up with is your production forest stays as it is, very nice and very stable, and you just slowly unpick the administrative sides of it. So first of all, you can take all your users out there in there, give them the privileged access workstations, and let them carry on. And then you can start to unpick the service accounts. Start with the easy ones like backups first. A lot of the time, you'll probably find out that most of the domain administrators don't need to be domain administrators. It was just easier. That's what a lot of people used to do. Just go, that doesn't work. Let me just promote that to a domain admin. Oh, it works. But we're all sorted. So you could push that out to get to the easy ones first, go through those, and then start moving stuff over. But when you move over, you should literally be sat with your production forest, which is still probably got issues, but you should have the administrative side happening from over onto your secure side. And when people are moving, when things are going over, there'll be no domain admin hashes running around on like Responder or, left in an open share somewhere. And if you've got laps employed, if a user gets on one box, they shouldn't be able to then migrate to, 20, 30 other boxes. They're going to get stuck on one place, and then trying to escalate will be a lot harder, especially with the time to live.
Have you actually tested it?
Have I stood one up?
No, well, you tested Red Forest for penetration testing.
So we haven't come across one where it's been tested. We've helped build them, but I've stood one up in a lab environment, and played with the features and seen what doesn't work, what doesn't shadow properly. Like Exchange is one of the big ones that doesn't shadow very well. But we haven't seen, as I say, there's not a lot of customers or people that are doing this. It's becoming a lot more. I'm getting a lot more people talking about it when I go to do an assessment. Like, I've seen this, or people are starting to become quite aware of it. But it's been out for quite a number of years, and it's something that Microsoft are sort of pushing a bit more now. It's definitely a lot more technical. There's not a lot of detail. Most of the people that have built this are having to build it with very little documentation. Microsoft are like, yes, here's all the information here, but what we really want you to do is to pay $200,000 for them to come in and do it all for you and make it look all lovely. Yeah.
I can see it's probably not a massive laugh for someone to implement this, but what's the typical sort of time and staff commitments?
Yeah. So to actually build it doesn't actually take that long, because you're building something completely separate. So find some tin. So ordering kits takes about a week. To stand it up, you only actually need a domain controller and a WSUS server, and to put a cluster in one location and a cluster in another location. So once you've actually got that sort of stuff done, you've made your forest, you've done all the DNS and all the getting it up and running, and then you've put that trust in so that your production forest trusts your red forest. It's not actually that long to get implemented. You create your accounts. It's all a nice simple process. The hardest part of the red forest is to unpick all the legacy stuff that's lying around on the network. That's the hard bit. So you could probably build a red forest in a month and have it working, to get all the privileged access workstations sorted, distribute them to everyone, give everybody the credentials, the tier 0s, the tier 1s, tier 2 accounts, get all the password policies in place. But then you've got to then go, right, let's start removing the domain admins from the production forest. Let's move all the users that have got privileged access workstations. What we're left with, 20 service accounts that, probably one of them breaks payroll or one of the HR system relies on them, but it's also an SQL server password. So it's all the tech debt that you've got to unpick that's the hardest bit, but building it shouldn't take long at all. Yep.
It's a nice, shiny technical solution stuff, but the problem with it is your administrators are very, very bright to be able to kind of actually unpick everything.
So I've seen this
similar in about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It was just that it was so complex that none of the admins could work it out. I mean, just about local groups and global groups and things fitting into that.
Yeah.
And splitting those across 2 separate forests or 3 or 4 separate forests and stuff. It just made most people's headaches.
So it is a harder solution to employ, but once you get started, you've got to want to do it.
Yeah.
So the point where I've seen most places are, they're rolling it out, and even there, they've rolled it out to help desk. So help desk have a privileged asset workstation with a tier 2 account and only a tier 2 account, and they've embraced it quite well. it does curb a lot of bad habits as well. So people that are like not liking the hardened workstations and stuff like that. But once you've sort of got your group set up properly, and you've got your tier zeros, you can log onto your domain controllers. You've got your tier ones that logs into all your servers. People get more accustomed to it, and then they've got the privileged access workstation, and their admin console is their host, and they're having to go into a VM to do it. So they are doing it all, and you are going to need somebody that does understand it to help implement it. But once you've got it started, it's not scary.
But then every new system and every new deployment that you're putting into your environment, so if you've got a new payroll system or a new finance system or something like that being put in, you need quite highly technical people to be able to help implement that. Because the vendor's just going to come in and tell you, I need a domain admin account, and then you fall back into that trap again. And you need people who can kind of map out all this stuff. So you kind of increase the cost of, it's always a cost.
There's definitely an increase. You definitely need some bright people at the top who are helping design it.
Yeah.
But with what did you say, with like a new vendor coming in? For example, a new vendor coming in, because everything's obviously off to the side, they can be given a domain admin account to do the work and implement it. But you can speak to most products that you're getting in now don't need domain admin. They say they do, but you can also do, you can do your role-based access control stuff a bit better. You are going to need a couple of admins that understand this, through and through, and build it and dev it. And so I've been a Windows administrator before, and I got it up and running in a lab environment. No, a lab's not unpicking a very big domain, but I sort of played around with it, and it didn't take a crazy amount of time to do it. Once it's done, it's pretty much self-sufficient, because you've got all your stuff happening on one side.
I actually put one in like a good couple of years ago. It wasn't actually like a Red Forest, but it was separate.
Like a similar thing. Yeah.
So it wasn't quite as harmful as everything else and stuff, but it wasn't like context for everyone.
Okay. The places I've seen it employed, people struggle with it at the start to understand it, but the people that are there now, it's like second nature to them.
How daft do you think it is putting like privileged access workstations and everything else and all sticking it all in the same domain?
So your privileged access workstations are connected to your admin forest.
So saying if you didn't have an admin forest, you just put in calls and everything else and things into the same.
You probably increase the
using groups and kind of restricted groups.
Yeah, so you could probably increase the security by doing privileged access workstations in general. So you could take if you didn't want to do the Red Forest, you could probably take the privileged access workstation concept and employ it, because it is quite a nice concept with your admin host and your user VM, which means your user gets compromised, they can't break out anywhere and go and get admin cred. So you would probably increase the security of that, and the privileged access workstations is like a separate part. So people can just build the Red Forest and not use privileged access workstations, but you're sort of like asking for trouble there. But you could definitely implement just the privileged access workstation. There's a full hardening guide on Microsoft's technical articles, and they have like a level 1 to 5, and level 5 is a privileged access workstation, and it's got all the group policies in there, and it's good. You could basically just roll that out, and it's got all the guides on how to do all that. Has that answered your question enough?
Yeah, you could probably talk about this for ages.
Yeah.
List of benefits and things.
Cool.
Sorry, I was just wondering, what are the key differences between this type of Red Forest and conventional one-way trust?
So with your Red Forest, you're making like a bastion forest, and obviously you're doing all the extra hardening. You're doing the privileged access workstations, comes like sort of hand in hand with it, and it is just like putting a one-way trust in, but you're doing it in a way that you're making it more secure, which is why Microsoft called it the Red Forest. So it's not just like a one-way trust. You're putting a lot more effort into doing it, and you're also doing the tiers. So you put one-way trust in, and you could just have domain admin sat over here. But what they actually done with the Red Forest is got concepts like you're adding your tiers in. So you got your tier 0 for any domain controllers, your tier 1s for your servers, and your tier 2s for your workstations.
So is this new features, new protocols, or is it just really an approach?
It's an approach. So the functionality that you need is like shadow principles only come in 2016, which is why the Red Forest has to be at 2016, because a lot of the features to do all the trusts and the shadow principles are only in 2016. So that's the only thing that sort of comes along. But it's more of a concept, and more getting admins not to be lazy anymore. Don't just log into everything with DA. Log in, make sure you use your tier 2 accounts. And there's a lot of auditing you'll have to do at the start
to say, why did you log into that domain controller with your tier 2 account? Or why did you try to do that? Because it's left some credentials lying around. So it's more of a concept than lots of other things, but there's not too many new stuff. It's just the functionality side on one side. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you restrict the ACLs associated with Exchange such that you can't automatically go Exchange domain admin if you can't shadow it, or are you very much constrained to say we're going to treat Exchange servers like domain controllers?
Yeah, so that's the principle that most people are following is to make Exchange treat it like a domain controller because of these special groups that it creates that don't move over. So yeah, they just treat them like a domain controller because you can get DA from Exchange. So yeah.
Do you have a separate SIEM instance for your Red Forest?
So you can probably pull out the logs using your conventional system. If you're going to poke a firewall hole, just to pull out your logs, that shouldn't be the end of the world. So you wouldn't need to put a new SIEM instance in. Yeah.
So you normally log all traffic into logarithm or something.
Yeah. So you've got all your logging happening on one side, but there should be no credentials. There should be just Windows event logs that are being sucked out, and you try.
So somebody can suck those event logs from. You can send event logs to your log.
Yeah. So your logarithm would sit on your production side, not in your Red Forest. You could build a separate SIEM instance if you wanted to, but it's got to eventually talk to a SOC. So there's got to be a little bit of compromise on firewall rules to allow stuff to get out to get to where its actual location. As long as you've locked down the source, destination, and ports, you should be shrinking the attack surface to like something minuscule. We're finished. Cool. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Have you seen anybody being able to kill off NCLM entirely internally?
So no.
Anybody trying to restrict it so you only do NCLM to Exchange and to your...
Yes, we've seen people try to do certificate stuff as well.
It looks that between whitelisting and NCLM, you'll probably kill off the 97% of the attacks.
Yeah, so you as I said in like one of the things is to make sure your client's not got all the general. Yeah. You don't want to build this like amazing thing, but somebody can still like MS-1710 the entire network because they're just going to go around attack the whole network and go, I didn't need domain admin because I could admin everything, or a shared password or a horrible open share. The Red Forest doesn't fit like fix open shares. You need to go away and make sure you get away with all the stuff. But you're right. You want the low hanging fruit to go away, and then to even make it even harder if somebody was to get like a beacon on a host.
Thank you.
All right.